Cinderella, or the Little Glass Slipper, version 2. All right, let's update this into language that you understand, because some of the pieces are just a bit tricky. So, once upon a time there was a gentleman who married for his second wife the proudest and most haughty. Haughty means she thought she was better than everybody else. It's spelled Haughty, not haughty like Hottie. So, she was mean, nasty, and thought she was better than everybody else, right? She had 2 daughters of her own, and indeed, they were exactly like her in all things. The gentleman also had his daughter of rare goodness and sweetness of temper, meaning she was very sweet and very patient, as we know if you listen to version 1, which she took from her mother, who was the best creature in the world. Now, you have to understand that in one of the original versions, it's because the mother's dead that he remarries, right? Okay. The wedding was scarcely over, meaning it didn't take her long, that the mother's bad temper began to show herself. She couldn't stand Cinderella because Cinderella, being so nice, made her own daughters appear more odious. What does that mean? It means that it made them appear terrible, right? Repulsive, very unpleasant. Repulsive is sort of what happens to you when you get too near a skunk, right? Ugh. You close yourself off, you squinch your eyes, and everything backs up. That's how these girls were too. The stepmother gave her the meanest work in the house to do. Really, what they mean is the hardest. It was the worst work to do. Scrubbing the floors, cleaning out the bedrooms. Come on now, you've had to clean out your bedroom before, right? Not fun. Then it says the poor girl had to sleep in the garret. Here's another word we don't use. What they mean is attic. Now, not everybody has an attic anymore. Attics are really fun things. But in this, what they're trying to say is she was way up top of the house in a very small, cramped space. And she had to sleep upon a wretched straw bed. Now, that is what they slept on in those days. But people that had more money, which these guys did, usually had other materials that they used instead of straw, because straw, think about it, gets really pokey. You don't want to sleep on straw. Now, they slept in fine rooms with inlaid floors, upon beds of the newest fashion. So what they're saying is they had the coolest bedrooms. Inlaid floors means they had decorations inlaid in the tile, because they didn't have carpet back then the same way we do now. And they had looking glasses so large they might see themselves at their full length. Well, think about it. If you can see your whole body in a mirror, then it's really long. Now, nowadays you can go to Walmart, pick one up for about $6, put it in your car and get it home really easily. But back then, they had horses and carts. So imagine a long mirror bouncing along in the back of a cart. Doesn't make it easy. So you have to be, and there wasn't a Walmart either, you have to be really careful and usually really rich to have somebody come and do something like that for you. Okay. She bore it all patiently, which means she took it with all of her patience. She bore it. B-O-R-E. And dared not complain to her father, who would have scolded her if she had done so, for his wife governed him entirely. What that means is, his new wife, which we already know, bullied him. And he was kind of a wimp, so he took it, and he would have scolded Cinderella because she was being mistreated. Not particularly friendly or fatherly. All right. When she had done her work, she used to go to the chimney corner. Now, that's because it was warm there, and they didn't have heaters back then. So the chimney, or the fireplace, was a warm area to sit, and she sat down among the cinders, again, because she was warm. Now, some stories say Cinder Wench, and some say Cinderella. This says both, and it says Cinderella because the younger sister was not as rude and uncivil as the elder, so she was friendlier. She couldn't be as mean to Cinderella. In spite of her mean apparel, now they talk about that through the whole story, it doesn't mean she had mean clothing. It means that it was much less refined or much less comfortable. It didn't look as good. It was the scraps. It was the hand-me-downs that nobody else would have taken. Not like going to a thrift store nowadays where you can find stuff that's in great shape. Cinderella was given more rags, and that's what they mean. It was mean clothing. Back then meant really no one would wear it. It was the things that now you'd wear if you were going to garden outside and get all dirty, or paint, and you didn't mind it being ruined. That's what they mean by mean clothing. Okay, let's keep going on. Oh yes, she was 100 times more handsome than her sisters. Handsome is what they used back then to mean beautiful or very good looking. So when they say that, now we've turned it into, it's only for men. Back then, they didn't care. What they said was, she was so much better looking than her sisters, and they were always richly dressed, but she was not. All right, so we know that the king's son gives a ball, which is really kind of silly because you know the king paid for it, and invited all the persons of fashion. What that means is everybody that had money, yeah? Everybody that could afford to put on beautiful clothing. And in another version of this story, they talk about this family was well-to-do. And they were invited here, it says, because they cut a very grand figure among the people of the countryside. In other words, they were good-looking, they had money, and so they got invited to the party. They were highly delighted, and they were choosing their gowns, petticoats, and headdresses. What that means is their dresses, their petticoats were what went underneath. If you've seen these stories before, then you've seen how they're all puffy underneath their dresses. That's because of the petticoats. And headdresses are what they wore, like bows and barrettes and maybe a little hat with some, well, back then they'd even put like dead birds and dead flowers up on their head. It was fashion. Now not so much. Then it says, this made Cinderella's lot still harder, for it was she who ironed her sisters' linen and plaited their ruffles. So she was the one who ironed all the clothes. She was the one who made sure there were no wrinkles and that all their ruffles were straight and puffy, right? Now they ask her what the sisters tell what they're going to wear, yes? And the younger one says, I shall wear my usual skirt, but then to make amends for that, I will put on my gold-flowered mantle. Okay, and her diamond stomacher. Those are the shirts. And the stomacher is what we now call a corset, yeah? So in other words, to make up for the fact that she's wearing a plain skirt, she's going to put on a gold-flowered shirt and then a diamond corset. What's a corset? It's those pieces that go from just where your breastbone is down to your belly, and it squishes everything, because back then they thought it was far more important for women to have an hourglass figure. So your shoulders could be okay, but underneath you had to have a waist that was all cinched together, which actually was really dangerous because you can't breathe if you can't open up your lungs and your stomach. Breathing from down in your stomach is so much better for you. But a lot of times back then, they would make their corset so tight that they would faint and they'd have to be picked up, which is not really very attractive and not at all comfortable. Okay, so then they sent for, oh yes, let's not forget, So the best hairdressers, and they bought patches for their cheeks. These were for color. Now you see women put on rouge, or they have little stripes of color on their cheeks. Well, subtle, it shouldn't be stripes. But back then, not everybody had makeup all over the place. And so they would buy patches for their cheeks so that they would color them. They consulted Cinderella because she had good taste, and she always told them the best. She even offered to do their hair and makeup, which is kind of crazy, right? That shows you how lovely she is. Even though these two sisters are so mean to her all the time, she's still willing to help them and make them look beautiful for the ball. And it says, anyone would have dressed their hair awry, but she was good-natured and arranged it perfectly well. In other words, even though somebody else might make it stick out in the back where they couldn't see, she was very happy to help them and to make sure that they looked beautiful. Then it says they broke a dozen laces in trying to lace themselves tight so they might have a fine, slender shape. And that's what I was talking about earlier, that stomacher, right? They pulled all that together and then they lace it up. Well, these guys were trying to be so skinny to look like all the girls in the magazines, though they didn't have magazines like that back then. But now, everybody wants to look like the models, right? Well, not everyone. So, these ladies were breaking the laces because they were pulling on them so hard to get them tiny. Okay. The day came. Now, here's an interesting thing to me. The godmother shows up, and she says, "Be a good girl and I'll see what I can do." She took her into her chamber, which means her room, her bedroom, and said to her, "Run into the garden and bring me a pumpkin." Now, here's the funny thing. You're not going to turn a pumpkin into a carriage in somebody's room, right? You're going to do it outside. So that was kind of curious to me. This particular version did that. They do it all in her room, which is interesting because then they don't talk about how they get the pumpkin carriage out of her room. But this is because sometimes people were paying attention that way and sometimes they were just enjoying a story. Then we get into the very strange. Well, let me go back. So, get a gilded coach, yeah? In other words, it was brand new, it was sparkly, it was perfectly all the metal being just shiny, yes? Okay. Then she went out to the mouse trap where she found 6 mice, all alive. Really impossible, because back then, like a lot of traps now that aren't humane, it would have killed the mice. Same with the rats. But, okay, they get them, and then she goes out and gets 6 lizards. Good for her. She's catching things very easily. Now, they talk about they need a coachman. The coachman was the driver. He only drove the carriage. And you get to the lizards, and they turn into the liverymen. Yes? What does that mean? It means those are the guys that open the doors and help Cinderella out of the carriage. Now, why is it important that she has so many? We get she needs 6 horses to pull this carriage. It's a great big carriage. And she needs 1 driver. But 6 lizards? Yeah, you know why? Because back then, the more people that you had helping you, the more rich you appeared. So the godmother is making it look as though this mysterious princess that's arriving has absolutely everything that she could need to be perfect and well-to-do enough, wealthy enough, rich enough, fine enough for a prince, right? She's making up a great illusion. What we realize in the story, though, is that Cinderella as a person is royal enough, is compassionate enough, is loving enough to be perfect for a prince. That's the way they're trying to tell you in the story. And that's why she has to get 6 lizards. Then the fairy godmother says to her, "Aren't you pleased?" And she says, "Oh yeah, but what about my outfit? I'm looking kind of draggy here." Oh, not draggy. I don't mean that. Dragging. In a way that she looks a little bit frumpy. Do we know what frumpy means? It's certainly not dragging. Frumpy means that she looks like she's in those rags covered in the ashes or the cinders. She doesn't look presentable for a ball, right? Okay. Then, of course, her godmother says, "Don't you dare stay after midnight." This was kind of middle of the night for these guys, so that's why. Well, she gets there and she stuns everyone. Normally, a prince would not come out to the carriage and help her out. That would be for the liverymen. So it's very unusual that he comes out to see, right? And they say there was suddenly a profound silence. In other words, here's this big party going on. She walks in and everybody is quiet. Everybody stops dancing. The violins cease to play. Violins are beautiful instruments, and it makes it sound like all they're doing is playing violins. Chances are they would have had a whole band or an orchestra, right? But the point is, everything stops because she is so beautiful and nobody knows her. So the king himself says he could not keep his eyes off her. It's been a long time since he's seen such a beautiful and lovely creature, which probably the queen is not thrilled with. Ladies like to be told they're beautiful, and that was kind of offensive. But the point is, she's so beautiful, even the king has to talk about it. Okay, all the ladies are busy studying her clothes and headdress, so they might have theirs made the next day after the same pattern, provided they could meet with such fine material and able hands to make them. What does that mean? What it means is you couldn't just go and buy material, not as easily, and certainly not fine material. Again, the godmother gave her the very best. Back then, it wasn't easy to find somebody who could sew well. Or, well, sometimes it isn't today either. But anyway, what they're saying is it's really important that she looks so beautiful, nobody can find the stuff that she was wearing, and able hands to make them. So somebody who could do such a beautiful job. Again, they're saying the fairy godmother did the job. And well, everyone's jealous and they want what she has. The king's son takes her to the seat of honor. That was conducted her. He took her, yes? You would conduct an orchestra, but what they're saying is he guided her to the seat of honor and then takes her and dances with her. So she can dance, which is another interesting thing. She wouldn't know how, but we're going to say probably the godmother gave her some skills, okay? So she learned how to dance. Then it says, a fine collation was served, but the young prince ate not a morsel, so intently was he occupied with her. In other words, he thought she was so beautiful, and he wanted to spend time with her so much that when they put out all the beautiful food, he didn't eat anything. He was too busy. Now, here's another interesting thing they do in this version. She went and sat down with her sisters, showing them 1,000 civilities, meaning she was really nice to them. And she told them they looked pretty. And then she shared the oranges and citrons. Now, citrons are sort of like lemons, but the skin is thicker and really beautiful smelling, and they're not quite as sour as lemons. So all of these things are things that only royalty, or the king and queen and the prince, would be able to afford to bring, because you'd have to get them from somewhere else. And citrons specifically were from Asia. So definitely that would have come a far way away. And she goes over and starts handing them to her sisters, who are really surprised, for they had not been presented to her. In other words, nobody introduced them. Nobody ever said, hi, this is so-and-so, hi, that's so-and-so, which was required back in those days. So imagine if you're sitting somewhere and all of a sudden a stranger walks up and says, hi, let me give you these amazingly expensive things, and oh, you look beautiful. You'd be happy, but you'd be kind of confused, right? Okay, so that's that part. And then, of course, it says it struck 12, and or quarter to 12, which is 15 minutes to 12, and she at once made her adieus to the company, which means she said goodbye. Adieu, adieu. French word meaning goodbye, yes? So, she hastens away as fastly as she can. There you go, she runs. So, as soon as she gets home, she finds her godmother. When her sisters come home, she pretends that she's been asleep and asks about the ball and how it's been. And they say to her, there came thither the finest princess. That means she came forward into the party, right? Thither is a very old word, but really it just means she came in there. The most beautiful ever seen with mortal eyes. What's a mortal? We are. It means you're born, you live, you die. You're mortal. Not like all the superheroes we're seeing who don't die, right? Ever seen with human eyes. And they talk about how she came up and gave them all this fancy stuff. They're trying to make her jealous, but it's all right, because it also means they were impressed by what she did. So they tell her he wants to see her again. And then there's this little thing. How fortunate you've been. Could I not see her? Oh, Miss Charlotte, she says to her sister, do lend me your yellow suit. Now, first of all, she knows Charlotte is not going to lend her any clothes, which is what Charlotte says. But also, she's trying to pretend, I want to go meet this lady. Please, can I wear your fineries? Of course, Charlotte's going to say no. And it says, indeed, she expected that answer and was very glad for the refusal. Why? Because how's she going to go meet herself? She knows better, and she's having a little fun that Charlotte will never, ever understand. So, they all go back to the ball. She's dressed even better. Now, you've got to understand, she was dressed beautifully the first time. So the fact that she goes back again dressed even better, the prince is in a dither, right? That means he doesn't even know what to do with himself. He's telling her every story he can to make her be impressed with him. He wants her to see, oh, I'm amazing and I am so interesting. And it says that didn't turn her off. That didn't make her walk away. She was really impressed that he was being impressed with her. So that's good too. She leaves at midnight this time as it's ringing, nimble as a deer. Well, if you've ever seen a deer who gets a little nuts and isn't stuck in a headlight, they jump like crazy. And they're very, very coordinated. So that's what they're saying. She was as coordinated as a deer. Boom! So, he could not overtake her. He couldn't catch her. She went way too fast. But she leaves behind her slipper, which he takes up most carefully. In other words, it's a glass slipper. He doesn't want to break it because it's the only clue he has to find her. Interesting, she sticks her other in her pocket and carries it around with her, even though it's a glass slipper, right? That's all right. So, afterwards, they send a guy who, it says, looks at her and he finds her so beautiful. So even though she's dressed in rags, when she says, can I try on the shoe? He looks at her and says, you know what? It is just that she should try. In other words, that's fair. They told him to put it on every single young lady. So he does, because he thinks she's really pretty. He lets her sit down and try it on. It fit as if it was made of wax. What does that mean? Well, have you ever gone to try on shoes? Some fit, some don't. Some hurt, some don't. Sometimes you got to be at the shoe store a long time before you find one that really fits you and you like. when they say it was as though it was made of wax. Wax is very pliable. Like you've seen people make things out of clay, right? They make statues and different things, and they mold it a little bit with their hands. Wax, when it gets heated up, is very, very pliable. It's very easily shaped into whatever shape that you want. So if you were to put it on someone's foot and shape it around their foot, then it would fit perfectly and it would be so comfortable and warm. Oh my goodness. Once it actually heated up, it would melt, but it would shape beautifully around her foot. And that's what they're saying. He put on this glass slipper, which, come on, think about it. That's not going to be really comfortable, but it fit her as though they had shaped it exactly to her foot. That's what they're saying, as though it had been made of wax. Now, everybody freaks out. Oh my gosh, this beautiful lady's shoe fits Cinderella perfectly. Well, at that moment, the fairy godmother comes in, touches Cinderella's clothes with her wand, and now, for the third time, they're made to look more beautiful than before. The first time it was rags to this beautiful dress. The second time it was an even better dress. Now it's an even better dress. So they stick her in the carriage and they take her to the prince, and the prince goes bananas and says, I'm marrying her immediately, which is usually not a good idea, but this is a fairy tale, so for them that was a happy ending. Back then, women were to get married, and to be married to a prince was an amazing feat, which is why they say she brings her two sisters to the court, which means to the gathering of people that all have money that live at the palace or nearby. They're invited to all of these things, yes? Not the kitchen people, not the guy who cleans the horse, but all the rich people that are there. So they take her there to all those people, and she brings her two sisters and invites them to come live at the palace. And that same day marries them to two great lords of the court. Now again, everybody's getting married in a big hurry. I'm not suggesting it, and it's not what we do today. Well, there are some TV shows where they do it, but it's usually not a good idea. It's better to get to know somebody. So that is their version and my updating of Cinderella. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks. Bye.